I'd been working late again, something that had become routine in the 6 months since I'd joined the firm. The building was nearly empty, just the hum of the heating system and the distant sound of a janitor's vacuum somewhere on another floor. I gathered my things quickly, shoving papers into my bag with the kind of tired efficiency that comes from doing the same motion every night. I was halfway to the elevator when I realized I'd left my coat at the dry cleaners. Again. The 3rd time this month. I stood there for a moment, weighing my options: make a run for it and arrive home soaked, or go back upstairs and see if there was an umbrella in the supply closet. Neither option felt particularly appealing, but the thought of sitting on the subway in wet clothes made the decision for me. That's when I saw it. A jacket hanging on the coat rack near the conference room, charcoal gray and clearly expensive. Wool, probably cashmere blend. I shouldn't have touched it. I knew that. But my hands were already reaching for it, and I was already telling myself I'd return it first thing in the morning, and then I was slipping it on and it fit perfectly, the sleeves just the right length, the shoulders sitting exactly where they should. It smelled like something I couldn't quite place. Not perfume, exactly. Something woodsy and clean, with a hint of something else underneath. Cedar, maybe. Or sandalwood. I pulled the collar up against my neck and headed for the elevator, telling myself this was fine, this was practical, this was just borrowing. I didn't realize it was hers until I was already on the train. The jacket had been hanging in the shadows, and I hadn't looked closely at the rack. But as I sat down and slipped my hand into the pocket for my phone, my fingers brushed against something else, a business card holder, slim and leather. I pulled it out without thinking, and there it was, Eleanor Reeves, senior partner. My boss. My boss's jacket. I was wearing my boss's jacket. My first instinct was panic. My second was to get off at the next stop and go straight back to the office. But it was past 9, and the building would be locked by now, and I'd need my keycard which I'd left in my desk drawer because I was always forgetting things like that. So I sat there, holding the card holder, feeling the weight of the jacket around my shoulders, and trying to figure out how I was going to explain this tomorrow. I'd been trying not to think about Eleanor Reeves too much. It was a losing battle. She was the kind of person who commanded attention without seeming to try. Tall and composed, with dark hair she wore pulled back in a way that should have been severe but somehow wasn't. She spoke carefully, precisely, like someone who'd learned long ago that words had weight and consequences. In meetings, she had this way of listening that made you feel like you were the only person in the room, even when there were 12 other people around the table. I'd been assigned to her team almost immediately after starting, which everyone said was either a great opportunity or a terrible mistake, depending on who you asked. Eleanor had a reputation. Brilliant, exacting, fair but unforgiving of carelessness. She'd built her career on being better than everyone else in the room, and she expected the same from the people who worked for her. I'd been terrified of her for the first month. And then gradually, the terror had shifted into something else. Respect, certainly. Admiration. But also something I didn't want to examine too closely, something that made me hyper-aware of when she entered a room, something that made my heart do this stupid little skip when she said my name. The jacket was still warm from where it had been hanging. I pressed my face against the collar for just a second, breathing in that cedar sandalwood smell, and then immediately felt like an absolute creep. I sat up straight, stared determinately at my reflection in the train window, and tried to think about anything else. By the time I got home, I'd convinced myself it would be fine. I'd get to the office early, hang the jacket back on the rack, and no one would ever know. Simple. Easy. Except that when I woke up the next morning, my phone was flashing with an emergency alert. The subway line I took to work was down, signal problems, delays of at least 2 hours. I could take a bus, but that would mean arriving late, which would mean the office would already be full of people, which would mean sneaking the jacket back onto the rack would be impossible. I called in sick. I never called in sick. I had perfect attendance, a record I was quietly proud of, but I couldn't think of any other option. I spent the entire day in my apartment pacing, the jacket hanging on the back of my door like an accusation. Every time I looked at it, I felt a fresh wave of anxiety mixed with something else, something that felt dangerously close to longing. The next day, I got to the office at 6 in the morning. The building was dark and quiet, exactly as I'd hoped. I took the elevator up to the 14th floor, my heart pounding in a way that felt completely out of proportion to what I was doing. It was just a jacket. I was just returning it. This wasn't a crime. But when I got to the coat rack, Eleanor's jacket wasn't there. None of her things were there. The rack was empty except for a forgotten scarf that had been there since before I'd started. I stood there for a long moment, holding her jacket, trying to figure out what to do. I could leave it on her chair. I could hang it on the back of her door. I could. Looking for something? I spun around so fast I almost dropped the jacket. Eleanor was standing in the doorway of her office, a coffee cup in one hand, watching me with an expression I couldn't read. She was wearing a white shirt and dark trousers, no jacket, and her hair was down around her shoulders in a way I'd never seen before. It made her look younger, softer, though her eyes were as sharp as ever. My voice came out as barely more than a whisper. I cleared my throat and tried again. I borrowed your jacket. By accident. The other night. It was raining, and I thought it was I didn't realize it was yours until I was already on the train, and then yesterday the subway was down and I was rambling. I could hear myself rambling, but I couldn't seem to stop. Eleanor just stood there, watching me, her expression unchanging. I'm so sorry, I finished, holding the jacket out toward her like an offering. It won't happen again. She didn't take it. Instead, she walked past me, setting her coffee down on the conference table, and then turned to look at me again. Really look at me, in a way that made my skin feel too tight. Did you have it cleaned? She asked. What? The jacket. Did you have it dry cleaned? I shook my head, confused. No. I was going to bring it back right away, so I didn't think. Then it still smells like you. The words hung in the air between us. I felt my face flush hot, felt my grip on the jacket tighten. Eleanor's expression still hadn't changed, but there was something in her eyes now, something I couldn't name. I'll have it cleaned, I said quickly. Today. I'll take it to the place on Fifth Avenue, the expensive one, and I'll have it back to you by. Keep it. I stared at her. What? Keep the jacket. She said it calmly, matter-of-factly, like she was discussing a case file. It looks better on you anyway. I can't, I started, but she held up a hand. Consider it a bonus. For the Morrison contract. You did good work on that. The Morrison contract had closed 2 months ago. This had nothing to do with the Morrison contract. We both knew that. But I couldn't think of anything to say that wouldn't make this moment even more impossible than it already was, so I just stood there, holding her jacket, watching her pick up her coffee and walk into her office. She paused in the doorway, glanced back over her shoulder. Same color looks good on you too, she said, so quietly I almost didn't hear it. You should wear more gray. And then she closed the door, and I was left standing in the conference room, holding a jacket that smelled like cedar and sandalwood, my heart doing that stupid skip again, trying to figure out what had just happened. I didn't keep the jacket. Not at first. I hung it in my closet, still on its hanger, and tried to pretend it wasn't there. But every morning when I opened the closet door, I saw it. And every morning, I thought about wearing it. About how it had felt, that night in the rain, like being wrapped in something safe and warm. About how Eleanor had looked at me, really looked at me, when she said I should keep it. A week passed. Then 2. The jacket stayed in my closet, untouched, while I told myself this was the right choice, the professional choice. Eleanor and I continued to work together as we always had. She gave me assignments, I completed them, she provided feedback that was always sharp but never cruel. We were colleagues. That was all we were. That was all we could be. Except that now, sometimes, I'd catch her looking at me in meetings. Not the way she looked at everyone else, with that focused professional attention. This was different. Quieter. Like she was trying to solve a puzzle I hadn't realized I'd presented. And sometimes when she passed my desk, I'd catch that scent again. Cedar and sandalwood. It made something in my chest tighten every single time. It was Reese who finally broke the silence I'd been maintaining. Reese worked in litigation, had been with the firm for 3 years, and had taken me under her wing from day one with the kind of fierce protectiveness usually reserved for family. We'd gotten coffee every Friday morning since I'd started, a ritual I'd come to depend on. So, she said, 3 weeks after the jacket incident, stirring sugar into her latte with more force than necessary. Are you going to tell me what's going on with you and Eleanor, or am I going to have to guess? I nearly choked on my coffee. What? Nothing's going on. Why would you think? Please. Reese gave me a look that said she wasn't buying it. I've seen the way she looks at you. And I've definitely seen the way you look at her. Also, Marissa from accounting said she saw you coming in at 6 a.m. 2 weeks ago carrying something that looked suspiciously like Eleanor's jacket. I borrowed it by accident, I said quickly. Too quickly. It was raining. Aha. Reese took a sip of her coffee, watching me over the rim of her cup. And the looking? That's also by accident. I didn't answer. I couldn't. Because Reese was right, and we both knew it, and saying it out loud would make it real in a way I wasn't ready for. Reese's expression softened. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Honey, I'm not judging. Eleanor's gorgeous and brilliant, and if I weren't happily married, I'd probably be looking at her the same way. But you need to be careful. She's your boss. The power dynamic alone. I know, I interrupted. Trust me, I know. That's why nothing's going to happen. That's why I'm not even thinking about it. Except you are thinking about it. That's kind of the whole problem. She wasn't wrong. I'd been thinking about it constantly, in the spaces between work and sleep, in the quiet moments when my guard was down. Thinking about the way Eleanor's hand had brushed mine when she handed me a file last week. Thinking about how she'd smiled, actually smiled, when I'd made a joke during a meeting. Thinking about that jacket hanging in my closet, waiting. It doesn't matter what I'm thinking, I said finally. She's my boss. She probably doesn't even, she was just being nice about the jacket. That's all. Reese made a sound that was halfway between a laugh and a snort. Eleanor Reeves doesn't do nice with clothes. That woman has literally sent people home to change because their outfits weren't professional enough. If she told you to keep her jacket, it wasn't about being nice. I thought about that for the rest of the day. Turned it over in my mind during meetings, while reviewing contracts, on the subway ride home. Eleanor Reeves doesn't do nice. What did that mean? What had she meant when she told me to keep it? When she said it looked better on me? That night, I took the jacket out of my closet. Laid it on my bed. Stared at it for a long time. And then before I could talk myself out of it, I put it on. It still fit perfectly. Still smelled like cedar and sandalwood, though fainter now, mixed with the scent of my own closet. I stood in front of my mirror, looking at myself, and for the first time in weeks, I let myself admit the truth. I didn't want to give this back. I didn't want this to be nothing. I wore the jacket to work the next day. I almost chickened out 3 times on the subway. Almost went home to change during my lunch break. But I didn't. I wore it through meetings, through calls with clients, through the endless routine of a Thursday at the office. And I waited for Eleanor to notice. She didn't say anything at first. I saw her glance at me once in the morning, her eyes catching on the jacket for just a second before moving away. But she didn't comment, didn't acknowledge it at all. By 3 o'clock, I'd convinced myself she hadn't noticed, or she had and didn't care, or she regretted telling me to keep it and was too polite to say so. And then, at 4:30, my phone buzzed with a message. Internal system, from Eleanor's office number, my office. When you have a moment. My hands shook as I gathered my notepad and pen. This was it. She was going to tell me the jacket thing was inappropriate. That I'd misunderstood. That I needed to maintain better professional boundaries. I knocked on her door frame. She glanced up from her computer, gestured for me to come in and close the door. I did, my heart hammering. Sit, she said, and I sat. For a long moment, she just looked at me. Really looked, the way she had that morning 3 weeks ago when I tried to give the jacket back. I forced myself to meet her eyes, even though every instinct told me to look away. I need to tell you something, Eleanor said finally. Her voice was careful, controlled, but there was something underneath it. Something that sounded almost like nervousness, though that seemed impossible. Eleanor Reeves didn't get nervous. And I need you to just listen until I'm finished. Can you do that? I nodded, not trusting my voice. Eleanor took a breath. Let it out slowly. I knew you took my jacket that night. I saw you from my office window. I'd stayed late finishing a brief, and I looked out and saw you at the coat rack. She paused. I could have stopped you. Should have, probably. But I didn't. My mind was racing, trying to process this. She'd known. She'd known the whole time. I told myself it was fine, Eleanor continued. That you'd bring it back the next day, and that would be the end of it. But then you didn't come in the next day. And I spent the entire day thinking about you wearing my jacket. Wondering where you were. If you were okay. She laughed, a short, humorless sound. I've worked with hundreds of associates over the years. I don't remember any of their names after they've moved on. But you, I can't stop thinking about you. And that's a problem. Why? The word came out before I could stop it, barely more than a whisper. Because you work for me. Because there are rules about this kind of thing for good reasons. Because I'm 20 years older than you and I should know better. Eleanor's hands were flat on her desk, like she was holding herself in place. Because I've spent the last 6 months trying to convince myself that what I feel when I look at you is just professional interest, and I can't do it anymore. The air in the office felt too thin. I couldn't catch my breath. What do you feel? Eleanor closed her eyes. Opened them again. Everything I shouldn't. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the clock on her wall ticking. Could hear my own heartbeat, loud and insistent. I'm not asking you for anything, Eleanor said quietly. I'm just telling you the truth, because you deserve to know. And because, she stopped. Started again. Because you're wearing my jacket, and I need to know if that means what I think it means, or if I'm seeing things that aren't there. I stood up. Walked around her desk. Stood in front of her chair, close enough that I could smell that cedar sandalwood scent, could see the way her chest rose and fell with each careful breath. It means, I said, my voice steadier than I felt, that I've been thinking about you too. Every day. Every moment. That I took your jacket because touching something of yours felt like the closest I could get to. I stopped, swallowed. To this. Eleanor stood up slowly, and suddenly we were inches apart, and I could see everything in her eyes that she'd been trying to hide, want and fear and hope all tangled together. We can't, she whispered, but she wasn't moving away. I know. It would be complicated. I know. We'd have to be so careful. The firm has policies. People would talk. I know. I reached up slowly, giving her time to pull away. She didn't. My fingers brushed her cheek, and she closed her eyes like it hurt. But I don't care. You should. But her hand came up to cover mine, holding it against her face. You should care. You should walk out of here and forget this conversation ever happened and find someone appropriate. Someone your own age who doesn't have any power over your career. Is that what you want? I asked. For me to leave? Eleanor opened her eyes. Looked at me with an intensity that made my knees weak. No, she said, and the word sounded like it was torn from somewhere deep inside her. God help me, no. I don't know which of us moved first. It didn't matter. One moment we were standing there, carefully apart, and the next her mouth was on mine and I was kissing her back like I'd been waiting my whole life for this. Her hands came up to frame my face, gentle and sure, and I felt something in my chest crack open, some locked room I hadn't known was closed. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathing hard. Eleanor rested her forehead against mine, her eyes still closed. We have to be smart about this, she said. We have to think about how this works. Okay. I'm serious. There are protocols. HR policies. We'll need to disclose the relationship. You might have to transfer to another partner's supervision. Okay, I said again, and then because I couldn't help it, so we're doing this? This is happening. Eleanor pulled back enough to look at me, and for the first time since I'd known her, she smiled. Really smiled, not the professional smile she used in meetings but something real and unguarded and beautiful. Unless you've changed your mind in the last 30 seconds, she said. I kissed her again, softer this time, taking my time. Not a chance. We stood there for a while longer, holding each other in the privacy of her office while the sun set outside the window and the building grew quiet around us. Eventually, we'd have to talk about the practicalities. About how to handle the firm, the gossip, the inevitable complications. But for now, this was enough. Her arms around me. My head on her shoulder. The jacket we were both wearing, in a way, finally exactly where it belonged.